All right, I'll begin. Mendicants, another word for monk. Mendicants, suppose you say, no matter how this person performs a deed, they experience it the same way. This being so, the spiritual life could not be lived, and there'd be no chance of making a complete end of suffering. Suppose you say, no matter how this person performs a deed, they experience the result as it should be experienced. This being so, the spiritual life can be lived, and there is a chance of making a complete end to suffering. Now, when I first went through this, I went, how can that be? How can it be that this difference is a difference between somebody being able to make a complete end of suffering and not? Now, rather than try to answer that now, what we need to do is give the Buddha the opportunity to explain exactly what he means. And then at the conclusion of the sutta, if we still doubt what he means by this initial outline, then we can discuss it further. And there are certain implications about the law of karma, the law of action and result, and the way people view this law. Some people view it wrongly and have a wrong understanding of what it actually means. And so I think it's worth just patiently going through the sutta without trying to solve this riddle, and then perhaps at the end it will make more sense. I hope that's okay with everyone. So he then starts to expand on the subject. Take the case of a person who does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell. Meanwhile, another person does the same trivial bad deed, but experiences it in the present life without even a bit left over, let alone a lot. What kind of person does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them sorry, getting confused. So let's just take this paragraph. He goes on, what kind of person does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell? A person who hasn't developed their physical endurance, and we need to check what we mean by that, ethics, mind, or wisdom. They're small-minded and mean-spirited, living in suffering. That kind of person does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell. Okay, so there's one kind of person who does what the Buddha is calling a trivial bad deed, and yet it is sufficient to land them in hell. Okay, so we really need to just expand on this a little bit. What do people understand by what we mean by a bad deed? In what way is it bad? What is it that causes it to be a bad or unskillful or wrong kind of action? Lucy, hello.
An unwholesome action, something which causes harm to yourself or others.
Excellent. So it's not, we're not talking about bad people, we're just talking about bad deeds. It's not a case of there being good and bad people, it's a case that there are actions that have a particular kind of result. That's the basis of the law of karma. Karma is action. Karma vipaka means the results of actions. If we perform an unskillful action, we understand that it was an unskillful action by the kind of result it produces, right? And so in this case, the Buddha is saying that this apparently trivial bad deed nonetheless ends the person up in hell. What do we mean by hell in context? Or how many different kinds of hell are there? That's a really weird question to ask anyone. I appreciate it if your hand doesn't go up. Birgit, hello.
Like a deed that that ends up with suffering.
Yes, so you're really talking about hell in this life itself, let alone subsequently, but it means a reification, a deepening of a state of suffering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you're going for? Okay.
About.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's perfect. It is a perfectly valid way of getting your head around the idea of rebirth. You know, to see that rebirth is merely an extension of this process. And if you can establish a common sense appreciation of what the Buddha is talking about within this very life, and of course we've got examples that we can look at, but we've got this a far more concrete idea of the nature of action and result because we're able to experience it ourselves. Yeah. So, you know, somebody performs a bad deed and it lends them up in a hellish state of mind or a hellish situation. It might be still within this life, but it is a large amount of suffering and a great deal of difficulty getting out of that state of suffering. Okay. And then we got another kind of person who does the same trivial bad deed. So exactly the same action, but it experiences it in the present life without even a bit left over, let alone a lot. What do we think that is suggestive of in distinction to the person that experiences it as, you know, experiences hell or falls into hell because of it? Anyone got any thoughts? Natalie, hello.
Would it be that they would just have an unpleasant feeling, and having just seen that arise and pass away, it would be over?
Yeah, so they may very well, you can't perform an unwholesome deed and not experience a painful result, but that painful result is contextualized. There's other stuff going on that makes it relatively okay to get through compared to just somebody just landing in hell because of it. So what do we think is meant by even without even a bit left over or let alone a lot? What does that suggest? I mean, you can look at it in terms of rebirth and say, well, somebody is reborn into a hellish state because their deed warranted it and they didn't have any kind of protection from it. But in the case of the person who has got some form of protection or other stuff going on in their life, it doesn't produce this excess. It doesn't produce, it means it's dealt with and then it's done and it's finished. There's no excess that is going to haunt them further down the line. So I answered my own question. Is everyone clear on that? Is everyone happy with that explanation? Do shout if any of this needs clarification. Only too happy to help. Okay, so what kind of person does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell? A person who hasn't developed their physical endurance. Now, when I first read that, I thought, oh, the Buddha wants us all to go down the gym and get fit. But looking at Thanissaro's translation, he says, now a trifling evil deed done by what sort of individual takes him to hell? There is the case where a certain individual is undeveloped in contemplating the body, undeveloped in virtue, undeveloped in mind, undeveloped in discernment, restricted, small-hearted, dwelling with suffering. A trifling evil deed done by this sort of individual takes him to hell. So we got a clarification that instead of it being an invitation to go down the gym, what we're talking about is contemplation of the body. So in what way is it problematic for somebody who hasn't developed the contemplation of body? What in context of this sutta, in the context of the law of karma, why would contemplation of the body, I mean, we'll come on to, yeah, why is it so helpful? What is the lack of development of that? Why is the lack of development of that so troublesome? What do you think? Pam, it's the hand raised at the bottom of the screen, but I've seen your hand, you raise your hand. So yeah, please unmute and let me know what you think. Are you talking, Pam? I don't think you've unmuted. There you go. Hi, Pam.
Have I got it?
You've got it.
Okay. So if there is a deed that lands them in hell, it obviously has to be significant. And they think I'm not sure I've got this right. If they think it's trivial, they're not paying a lot of attention to their actions, the results of those actions, or how perhaps they interact with other people. There can be, they're angry and they bump into somebody. Like, you could be all sorts of results from somebody that isn't being alert or aware.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very good point. I think all these actually feed from one to the other. So by starting with contemplation of the body, you do become aware, or you are more aware of your actions.
Mm-hmm.
You must therefore necessarily be more aware of the intentions behind your actions.
Yes.
That's a very important point. I mean, you can, in terms of the law of karma, for instance, there's a difference between accidentally killing or harming a living creature and intending to kill or harm a living creature. So
yes.
if it's dark outside and you just happen to squash a snail rather.
Snail.
If you happen to squash a nail, there was no intention, and so the karmic unwholesome action of killing or harming a living creature has not occurred. Doesn't mean you won't feel about it, but it hasn't. But if you literally, intend to go and squash a snail, then that is a karmically unwholesome action. And so if you are practicing contemplation of the body and the behavior of the body, then that will help to restrain from performing these unwholesome actions. So
I guess mindfulness is a very important trait to develop.
Can't do it without mindfulness.
Yeah.
And the thing about mindfulness is it means that you are voluntarily taking responsibility for your actions and their results. There is no excuse,
Yes.
Yeah. And so we're going to make lots of mistakes as we travel the path, of course. That's how we learn. It's trial and error, and this is so much about what the Buddha's teaching is pointing us towards: taking responsibility, becoming more aware of our actions and the kinds of results that accrue, and then adapting our behavior based on what we find out. So we get stung by the scorpion again and again, and then gradually go, oh, maybe if I leave the scorpion alone, maybe I won't get stung. So yeah. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
If I could ask you just to mute again. Thank you. All right. All right, so we've got mindfulness of body, and then comes ethics, virtue. So why is it that somebody who doesn't develop their ethics, their virtue, their knowledge, essentially their knowledge of right or wrong, why is that going to affect how a bad deed affects them, do you think? Hello, Giuseppe.
Hello there.
Hey.
Hiya. Well, how does it affect? Um, I think if you're thinking about how to develop mindfulness, then maybe there's already like a basis within your being for doing that. And then if you're not developing that, then something very trivial or something small that you think isn't a big issue will sort of snowball into potentially landing you in a hell.
This is a really interesting point. How does it snowball? Because it absolutely does. So what happens is like there is the result of some action. We experience the result of that prior unwholesome deed as sense contacts, feelings, painful feelings in terms of an unwholesome resultant, and unwanted perceptions. And with it comes a strong aversion to those things. And so you get this sort of like cascade of consequences that come from the initial, the resultant. And then because we've got no knowledge that actions have result, we've got no mindfulness, we've got no comprehension that there are skillful actions and unskillful actions. We're completely blind to the reality that's actually unfolding. And so inevitably there's just this cascade, this reaction upon reaction, this vicious circle of reacting negatively to the consequences of the negative reaction. And you're just getting this perpetuation and regeneration of pain and distress. So, without it, it's clear. You can clearly see without mindfulness, without a clear comprehension of how things work, without an awareness of ethics in the Buddhist sense, you are completely at the mercy of life. You're at the mercy of your own ignorant, unskillful actions. And so it isn't just one, it's like a whole cascade. And that's why people get so caught up and so passionate and end up performing ever worse deeds because they've got no awareness that ethics is a thing and they've got no mindfulness to actually see what they're doing. So yeah, very good point. Lucy, you've got your hand up too.
I think you've covered it now, but I was just going to say the more you develop your ethics, the more it stands out when you do something unwholesome.
And that's what we want, because we want to, it gets easier and easier and easier to experience the sting. You go, oh. And it's not a question that you necessarily know what the action it was that has generated this result. Yeah. It's not always the case that you look back and say, oh, it's because I had an argument with so-and-so this afternoon. A lot of the time it is, but sometimes the result of past actions just comes up from nowhere. It could be from any point in the whole series of past lives. So it's like you reach a point of going, well, this is really rather unpleasant. This must be a result of past actions, but I don't actually know what action. But I do know is these sense contacts are producing painful feelings, unwanted perceptions, and a strong tendency to want to get rid of these problems. And that's all you have to know. You don't have to know what the result was. There's a thing called asynchronous karma, which means there is a temporal gap between the performance of the action and the arising of the result. So the more you practice the way, the more you practice mindful noting, the more clarity there is about the nature of action and result and what the mechanics are of it, the more you get stung, the more you understand. And you understand what it is that perpetuates the problem, craving, and you know, therefore, what to restrain and what not to do. And over time, what happens is You get a handle on what works and what doesn't work. And so as time goes on, you're ever more unlikely to fall into hell-like states, because that process of reverberation and continual regeneration of painful resultants doesn't happen. Doesn't mean not even the Buddha himself, after his enlightenment, not even he could escape from experiencing the results of his past actions from before he became enlightened. So the idea that an enlightened person, and I think this is a really important point to make, the idea that an enlightened person could get knocked over by a bus and then just jump up and say, oh, I think I might have just experienced a bit of past unwholesome karma right there. An enlightened person, having been knocked over by a bus, is going to be writhing around in agony if they're well enough to writhe around. They're going to experience that pain. Yeah, and the idea that, you know, an enlightened person would never go is just fantasy, right? So not even the Buddha could escape from experiencing the results of his past actions from before his enlightenment for the duration of the rest of his lifetime. Beyond that, parinibbana. It's all done, all finished. All right, okay. So we also hasn't developed their physical endurance or contemplation of body, their ethics. So mind. So what is the benefit of developing the mind? So what we're talking about is samadhi, the second of the three trainings. What is the benefit of developing tranquility, loving kindness, mindfulness? How does that stop us falling into a pit of hell? I mean, I know we all know this, but most of us do. What is the absence of that training? What does it mean? What does it mean to actually develop it? How does that stop us from falling into states of hell? Because it really gets to the nub of the entirety of what the Buddha is saying in this sutta. What happens if somebody just never develops? So you've got the ethics side of like things like they never develop any generosity, any service. And what happens with the mind if they never develop any kind of compassion or loving kindness or tranquility? Rebecca, hello.
Hi, Paul. I think if you don't develop those things, then you aren't aware of when unwholesome states arise and you indulge them, allow them to persist.
Yes.
Whereas on the flip side, they still arise, but you're more aware of when they've arisen, and you can kind of cut them off in their tracks once you know what's happening.
Yes, because progressively we become less and less fearful of the unwholesome, the results of unwholesome past karma. So you can sit there and go, well, I really don't mind what arises in meditation, say. So with meditation, the cultivation of meditation, whether that's samatha meditation or insight meditation, you learn to accept what comes up and not to, in the case of samatha, not to attend to it further. In the case of vipassana, to thoroughly understand it with insight. So yes, absolutely. So the development of mindfulness, absolute cornerstone to the cultivation of mind, will enable you to gain control, harmonious control and understanding of the law of karma, action and result, rather than being just a blind slave to it. Excellent, very, very good. What about things like loving kindness, compassion, tranquility? How might that affect things? Peter, hello. Peter, are you on? You need to unmute. Oh, there you are.
Oh, shit.
Was that a little sweary we heard there from Peter? You there, Peter? You had it. You were unmuted. We're very close to a full moon. Oh, it's actually full moon today, I think. Right, there we go. All is explained. How does full moon affect one's ability to withstand the results of unwholesome past karma? It has an effect, and this is something I really want to bring out. What effect does the full moon have on us, would you say? Peter, hello.
It's the daylight. It's the light. We're very affected with lightness and darkness, and with a full moon, we end up howling at the moon. It's the
I've never
prolonging
quite
day.
got
The
that
boys
far.
and girls come out to play. The moon is shining.
Yeah, it tends towards mind.
It
tends towards mindlessness and confusion. The police know that they have more traffic incidents
yes.
all moon evening. They just know that that's a thing. So you've got, this is the point to bear in mind. You have all these conditions. We're talking about the generation of conditions. There is always a matrix of conditions at work. And when the right conditions come together, you get a resultant. So going back to my tried and tested singing bowl, where does the sound exist? It doesn't exist anywhere. It's like it has no independent, separate, permanent, or even lasting existence. It is merely the outcome of a concatenation of conditions arising now, and there is sound. The sound doesn't exist anywhere. And with the law of karma, it's exactly the same. A resultant is just a singing bowl ringing. It is just a concatenation of conditions coming together right now produces the result. Right? So if you want to limit the possibility of painful results, you develop the mind towards loving kindness, towards tranquility, towards compassion. You're changing the conditions, making it less likely for unwholesome conditions to emerge, making it more likely for pleasant resultants to emerge. Yeah. Is that all clear as mud? Rebecca, did you have another? You still got your hand up. Did you have another point you wanted to make? Oh, okay. I hope that's clear, because this is essentially everything. This is why I'm just sticking with this. We'll get through the rest of the sutta, but I'm just sticking with this so that we really bring out what's going on. So the last one here is wisdom. So how is it that someone not developing any wisdom, and what kind of wisdom might we mean in context, given that we've already talked about mundane wisdom? What other kind of wisdom is there, and how might that help? Or the absence of that wisdom not help? What other kinds of wisdom are there in the Buddha's teaching other than knowledge that one's actions have results and rebirth and so forth? Peter, hello.
We get less paranoid, knowing that there's no self, that there's endless change, that just looking at dukkha releases the subjective grip that it has on us by making it an object. With all these practiced skills, we release ourselves. Consequences, they don't last, and we know why they don't last, etc.
Yes, very well put.
etc.
Yeah, very well put. So that reverberation of like constant regeneration of painful resultants doesn't occur because we develop a keen, clear comprehension, the transformation of our perceptions that understand that all component parts of any experience are transient, ungraspable, and not self. Right? So there is with time and application and practice, there comes to be the complete comprehension of paticca samuppada, not just an intellectual understanding of condition-dependent origination, but a complete comprehension of it. That's the further step that leads to a complete understanding of action and result. So without it, people are destined to repeat the mistakes that get them reborn again and again and again. You cannot guarantee where you are going to be reborn and what kind of rebirth it will be. You have to get off the wheel eventually. So developing that deeper wisdom into the true nature of conscious experience is absolutely essential. Giuseppe.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, just to say, it's the thing that's really been going through in my mind when you've been talking about this is how, like, one small little thing can cause someone to lose it completely, get rage to an extent that they don't even realize they're waking up this morning, they're having a normal day, they get in their car, they go down the road, and someone cuts them up. And in that 1 second, they are going to kill somebody, like literally. And it's happened. And like, if you have the smallest amount of knowledge that potentially that feeling is not who you are, you have a hope in hell's chance, literally, of not doing something that you wish you wouldn't want to do. But it's very difficult. Like, you know, it's very easy to believe those feelings.
Oh, yes, because the feeling is real.
Yeah.
The feeling is real. The pain is real. And that gives you a sense that the narrative that you're running is real. But the narrative that you're running is not real. I mean, it's really running, but the content of the thinking at that time is not real. It's not that other person's fault. it's the failure to see that feelings are impermanent. It's the failure to understand how life works. It's ignorance. And that's the mistake that everyone makes. That's why the world ends up in an absolute state, and people are so angry and running about committing terrible crimes and just making things worse for themselves through doing that. You know, that's the other thing, is it's like there's no wise reflection to say, oh, I think this might be making the problem worse. It's like, it's just, that's just not there. But the more you practice the way in ethics, in meditation, and in wisdom, the more space you develop, this wonderful meditative space where you can see these things arising so much more clearly, so much more easily, and it doesn't hurt you as a consequence. And far from it, because you can change this up and go, well, if I do develop my loving kindness, if I do develop my compassion, if I do live ethically with a view that my actions have results, I can kind of like, in a very harmonious way, I can sort of like squidge life about, and it sort of magically become ever more peaceful, ever more tranquil, ever more delightful, ever more pleasant, with pleasant friends and pleasant experiences. And I don't have to experience all that. You know? You transform through the knowledge that your actions have results. Okay. They're small-minded and mean-spirited. Well, that's that's what you get for not being generous, not being kind. And you can just, you know they're small-minded and mean-spirited, living in suffering. That kind of person does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell. Okay, so then we have the corollary of that, if that's the right word. What kind of person does the same trivial bad deed, but experiences it in the present life without even a bit left over, let alone a lot? a person who has developed their physical endurance, contemplation of the body, ethics, mind, and wisdom. They're not small-minded, but are big-hearted, living without limits. That's interesting. What do we mean by living without limits? Let's have a look at the other translation. Developed in virtue, developed in mind, developed in discernment, unrestricted, large-hearted, dwelling with the immeasurable. That's interesting. What do you think? Anyone got any thoughts about that? Les, hello. Oh, we've got the old muting issue, Les.
Helped if you tried to do the mute down below as opposed to on the little screen. The limits are imposed by ourselves. Our perception that we are separate and living individually and apart from the world places limits upon us. So if we are more aware of that fact that we are imposing our own limitations on us, we've got a bit of playroom, a bit of flexibility to move about in.
Oh, yes. Very good point. Like, are you limited to your, not yours, Les, but is one limited to one's petty little narrative about the way life is? Or do you recognize that that might be relative and there might be other ways of looking at the same issue? And that's one end of the spectrum, going all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you see everything that unfolds as divine mystery. Is somebody who sees everything that's unfolding as divine mystery, even unwholesome resultants, are they going to be people that are mean-spirited and petty and likely to, cut you up on the motorway? I don't think so. So yeah, so it is a sense of the immeasurable, that life is so much more than these petty little issues and these petty little problems and so forth. But yeah, very good point, Les. Very good point. All right. Everyone happy so far? I don't know what to do if the answer is no, so we'll just carry on. Okay. All right, so now we have some examples. Suppose a person was to drop a lump of salt into a small bowl of water. What do you think, monks? Would that small bowl of water become salty and undrinkable? Yes, sir. Why is that? Because there is only a little water in the bowl. It's a very good analogy, but I did hear recently that there is some sort of health benefit to drinking a salty glass of water first thing in the morning, which I've been doing. I'm not really sure what the effect is supposed to be. It's something neurological, I believe. So I've been doing that, and I've come to understand that you can drink water with a smallish amount of salt in it. But anything more than that, a lump of salt, and no, it's not drinkable. Suppose a person was to drop a lump of salt into the Ganges River. What do you think, monks? Would the Ganges River become salty and undrinkable? No, sir. Why is that? Because the Ganges River is a vast mass of water. Now, again, I have to clarify that I have actually been to the Ganges. I would not drink the Ganges water for anything in the world. I think very few people would. Perhaps this was in a previous age where there wasn't quite so much sort of pollution and so forth. But the point is valid. Yeah. So what we want to do is create a vast ocean of goodness. And then when the unfortunate consequences of our past actions do have the right conditions, and the bell does get rung, and we do experience the painfulness, we are supported with so much good actions that we've performed that it doesn't matter. It is truly trivial. It doesn't affect us. It doesn't change us in the way that it would if we hadn't produced all that good stuff. Yeah. I think it's a brilliant, it's such the best metaphors are the really simple ones, because it just makes it so clear. This is how it is in the case of a person who does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell. Meanwhile, another person does the same trivial bad deed, but experiences it in the present life without even a bit left over, not to speak of a lot. Again, just reinforcing that sense of the reverberation of bad experiences. The Buddha doesn't leave it there. He comes up with another analogy. Is it an analogy or metaphor? I never know. It doesn't matter. Take the case of a person who is thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100, while another person isn't thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100. What kind of person is thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100? A person who is poor, with few possessions and little wealth. That kind of person is thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100. What kind of person isn't thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100? A person who is rich, affluent, and wealthy. That kind of person isn't thrown in jail for stealing $50, $1, or $100. Interesting analogy, but we do know that to be the case. Rich people can afford good lawyers. Poor people can't. I was told a story about a rich meditator who was driving with another meditator, and this other meditator told the story that they were in traffic on the motorway. So the rich driver got out of his car, moved some bollards from the what do you call that first lane, the emergency lane or whatever it's called, drove the car into that area, put the bollards back, and then drove all the way to the front of the queue. At which point, because it was a fairly long way, the police stopped him. They gave him a ticket. The rich man said, "Thank you very much." And they drove on their way. And he said to his passenger in the car, "Oh, don't worry, my lawyer will sort that out for me." That's what you get for being rich. That's why people want to be rich. It gives you that apparent power. But he's actually performed an unwholesome deed. So in a sense, what people want is the power not to be able to have to confront the fact that their actions have results. So we know it's, yeah. So what kind of wealth is the Buddha suggesting that we develop? Financial clout? Will that do the trick? Les, hello.
Yes, hello again. It would be the mindfulness, the awareness, the wisdom, the ethics. That's all wealth.
That I would humbly suggest is the greatest riches you could possibly amass. Yeah, because even if you are materially really successful, because this is the problem with being materially really successful, it turns you into a bit of a narcissist because you don't have to follow the same rules everyone else does. But at the breakup of the body at the end of this life, you've amassed this wealth that you have to leave behind. But what we're talking about here with developing spiritual wealth is the accumulation of really good karma. So whatever is going to come is going to reflect the way that you lived your life. I know which I'd rather have. I mean, I wouldn't mind having a bit of both. But of the two, hands down, spiritual wealth. Hands down. Okay. This is how it is in the case of a person who does a trivial bad deed, but they go to hell. Meanwhile, another person does the same trivial bad deed, but experiences it in this present life without even a bit left over, not to speak of a lot. It's like a sheep dealer or butcher. They can execute, jail, fine, or otherwise punish one person who steals from them, but not another. What kind of person can they punish? A person who is poor, with few possessions and little wealth. That's the kind of person that they can punish. What kind of person can't they punish? A ruler or their minister who is rich, affluent, and wealthy. That's the kind of person they can't punish. In fact, all they can do is raise their joined palms and ask, "Please, good sir, give me my sheep or pay me for it." That is how it is in the case of a person who does a trivial bad deed, but it lands them in hell. Meanwhile, another person does the same trivial bad deed, but experiences it in the present life without even a bit left over, not to speak of a lot. So it's not just rich, affluent, and wealthy. Of course, it's powerful. And you can understand why, so especially in a postmodern society, it's all about power. Who has the power? Because whoever gets the power gets the sheep, essentially. But is it really in their best interests? Is it really what's going to help them? There is another kind of power. It's exactly the same thing, but it's power, spiritual power rather than wealth. It's the power of the knowledge that your actions have results. It's the power to be able to experience a painful resultant, knowing that it's a painful resultant, knowing that it's a concatenation of conditions, and that all I have to do is just allow and surrender to the truth of what's unfolding at any given moment. That's true power. But it's lost on most folk, I'm afraid. Monks, suppose you say, no matter how this person performs a deed, they experience it in the same way. This being so, the spiritual life could not be lived, and there'd be no chance of making a complete end of suffering. Suppose you say, no matter how this person performs a deed, they experience the result as it should be experienced. This being so, the spiritual life can be lived, and there is a chance of making a complete end of suffering. So, what do you think? How is it that what's going on here? So he's saying that in the one case, there is the view that, or if it were reality, that you have to experience the result in exactly the same way the action was performed, that the result of the action will be the direct opposite of the action performed. And that means that there is no chance of coming to an end of suffering. And in the second case, it's no. You perform the action, and then the result arises as it needs to be experienced. That it isn't the direct, the mirror of the action. The result isn't the mirror of the action. You do have to experience the results of your actions, but it's not necessarily the case that it will be an exact copy. And that's what allows us to come to a complete end of distress, to overcome suffering completely. So what is it that we have to understand about the law of karma then? Anyone any thoughts about that? Dave, hello.
Hello. Well, is he sort of saying that if everyone experienced the same resultants, whatever their actions, there'd be no point in developing the spiritual path? But if you develop the spiritual path, you will still have the resultants, but it won't put you in hell because you developed all these positive qualities and mindfulness, and therefore you will be able to experience enlightenment without necessarily getting caught up in the situation that an unenlightened person or someone who wasn't practicing the path would end up in hell for. So it gives you the opportunity to develop, in the right direction.
So you can. So what we're essentially saying is that it's an adaptable field, if that makes sense. it's not a strict one-to-one correlation. It's a flexible system that can adapt and change, and because otherwise what we're faced with is pure determinism. Yeah.
And he's saying that if you develop the spiritual qualities, you're not faced with pure determinism. You can escape suffering.
Exactly. Because if we're faced with pure determinism, given that we've lived all these lives,
we would still be there.
There'll be no end to the resultants that we had to endure, and you couldn't escape from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Birgit, hello. Brilliant,
Is there also an element that if there wasn't any difference with regards to how we experience resultants, that by meditating and by watching what's happening, like we need to notice those differences in order to learn things?
Yes, so there would be no possibility to learn, because being mindful of resultants changes the way we experience the resultants. Yeah, absolutely. The very act of choosing to watch changes things fundamentally. That means it's not, the law of karma is not, it's not fate, it's not destiny, it's an open field. It's flexible, adaptable. It changes it's like the whole idea of the multiverse, all these, endless ways in which, your path through life can bifurcate and change based, on conditions. And it's like, that's the whole point. You get to be able to move your trajectory through life through the development of all these amazing qualities that we've been describing. So it's not determinism, but neither is it free will, because you have to experience the results of your actions. That's the law. And that's the law that perpetuates the round, because it is the failure to understand what's happening. That means that the actions that you perform must produce a result. In order to produce a result, there has to be another body-mind complex that arises after death in some way, shape, or form, so that there can be the continued experience of resultants. So it's not determinism, neither is it absolute free will. It's the law of karma, which is the middle way. But through the development of the path, in its ethics, in its mental development, and in the generation of true wisdom into the true nature of reality, you create the space to truly come, the meditative mental space, to truly come to understand the true nature of reality through looking at this process again and again and again. There's what we are experiencing, all of us right now, all in our own worlds, in our own ways. What we are experiencing are the results of all our past actions. What we're experiencing now is the result of all the decisions we've ever taken. That's where it's brought us to in this moment. What you're experiencing now are a whole series and set of resultants, endless series of resultants arising, arising, arising. And then you are choosing how you behave based on what's arising. It is the total comprehension of that which sets you free. Which is slightly going beyond. But what the Buddha is talking about there, it's implying all of that. So you cannot escape. The only way of escaping your karma is by realizing that there is no separation between me as the doer and the event. That it's all part of a non-separate flow, and there is no two. There is no me and the universe separate from me. There is only the unfolding of what's unfolding now. And so that's the realization that there is no self in any aspect of experience. It's all an absolutely delightful appearance field. And when you reach that point of truly realizing that everything is just this wonderful appearance, but everything that's arising is an expression of, for want of a better word, apologize, the divine mystery. I don't mean divine as in the creator God. I just mean divine as in just amazing. Amazing mystery that expresses itself in this, through this field of appearance. And it's realizing that that's all that's happening. You realize you have never been anywhere but exactly, you are totally at home at all moments. And there is just this appearance field, and it's got no substance. It's all just appearance. It's not rooted in anything. It's just conditions arising and passing away. It's glorious. That's freedom from karma, because you're not going, oh, this is happening to me. This is happening to me. Conventionally speaking, we persist with it until parinibbana, but there is the total comprehension that nothing is happening. It isn't happening to anyone. It's all occurring in spaceless space. All dimensions of time and space are illusory. It's just, there are no stories. All stories are fabrications. There is just this delightfulness that belongs to nobody and yet is everything. There are no words for it. That is the only escape from this perpetual mouse's wheel of samsara and constant, repetitive rebirth into. The last thing anybody wants to do is get another body. Come on, as you get older, don't you agree? As you get older, you think, oh, I don't want another one of these. You really want to be saddled with another one? What else is there? It's like that. It comes back to that thing we were talking about with Les about the immeasurable. There is so much more. That it's just there is just open potential, and that's all there is. And people get trapped by the appearance of things and take the appearance of things to be an absolute reality, and it's not. It's just this wonderful dream show, and it's understandable, completely understandable. It looks pretty real, doesn't it? Wow, yeah, looks pretty real. But the more you investigate it, the more you realize what a wonderful display it is. Just a ever-changing displays, expressions of perfection in these limited, finite ways, which arise and pass away. That's freedom from suffering right there. And the only way of realizing it and coming off the wheel of rebirth is a thorough examination and investigation of conscious experience as it's unfolding. When you're on the bus, when you're in the bath, when you're on your veg plot, when you're reading, well, if you're reading a book, you're reading a book. But if you're just sitting on your sofa, wherever, whenever, it's turning your attention to watching what is actually taking place with mindfulness and developing that wisdom. That's the way off, and you'll realize it for yourself. So, yeah. Any questions? Any thoughts? Or have we successfully navigated this sutta? Well, I think we're there then. I hope you found that helpful. Thank you for all your comments. Really appreciate them. And just to repeat what I said earlier, I'm extremely grateful for everyone's support and you know, and I think together we can continue to, yeah, get the path trod. Okay. All right, everyone. I think I've done my work for this evening.
Thanks a lot for that, Paul. That was a really good talk. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul.
you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Really amazing.
Love
See you
that.
again.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Given us a lot to think,
Yeah.
As
a lot to
always.
think
As always, Peter.
about there.
Yeah, that's my aim, Peter. Okay, everyone. Good night.
Night night.
Yeah. Cheers. Goodbye.